my name is Amy and I'm an Outreach Officer at Magdalen College, Oxford. This session is called How to Prepare for University Interviews. Oxford and Cambridge will interview for any subject that you apply for, and some medical courses around the country at other universities will also interview you, so this is in preparation for those kind of courses. This is based on what usually happens. This is being recorded in 2020 though, so I will add a side note where I can on where things might be different for this year, but we don't have a lot of information on this, so it's really important that you keep checking university websites and their latest releases on what their plans are. But most of it is still relevant. So what to expect? If you go for interview at Cambridge, you'll probably be there for a day. If you go for interview in Oxford, you'll probably be there for 2 to 3 days, sometimes more. You'll be staying in a college, which means you have a lovely opportunity to get a sense of college life, walk around the city a bit and have a feel for what it might be like to live there. You'll be given at least 2 interviews. Sometimes they're at the same college and sometimes they're at different colleges. This is completely normal. We have a system called pooling where sometimes people are asked for interview at other places to ensure that everyone gets a chance of getting in, even if it's not at their desired college. About 1 in 3 Oxford students are pooled, so it's totally normal and not something to worry about. There will usually be about 2 tutors in each interview, and the interviews usually last around 20 minutes. Sometimes this includes 20 minutes beforehand where you might be asked to read something, but the interview itself is usually around 20 minutes. So for medical courses at other universities, you'll usually spend a day there. You'll probably have 1 interview, sometimes more. There may be group interviews, and you might have something called multiple mini interviews, sometimes seen as MMIs. These are short practical assessments, which I'll go into more detail on later, but they're not used by Oxbridge, but they are used by other universities. So for 2020, lots of universities are moving their interviews online. Oxford certainly is. This is not new for a lot of universities. Oxford has been providing online interviews for years for their international students, so it's something we're very used to doing, and it's not something you need to worry about because we will know how to handle it. So unfortunately this year you won't have the opportunity to come and stay in the city, but you don't need to worry about the process. So this is current students at Oxford, all of them from Magdalen College, on how they found their interviews. So Adam says that as soon as the interview started, I felt a lot calmer. This is regularly reported. It's very normal to feel very anxious about interviews. Lots of people are very nervous beforehand, but often people report that when you get in there, when you sit down and when the tutors start putting you at ease, things start to feel a lot more relaxed and it's really not as bad as people fear. Eleanor says, try to enjoy the interview process. It's a great opportunity to talk to a leading expert in a field you're interested in. So if you need a way of thinking about it that might calm you down, one way of doing that is to think, actually, this is a really lovely opportunity to talk to somebody who's interested in a subject I'm interested in, and worst case scenario, you'll leave learning something you didn't know before. Katrin says, I think tutors enjoyed discussing something a little niche. I didn't list books I'd read, instead I spoke about why I found something interesting. So Katrin here is referring to probably something she mentioned in her personal statement, and what she's saying is that often people assume that there are things tutors want to hear, specific topics. It's not really the case. Tutors generally really want to hear what you're interested in, and if you can talk about something you're really genuinely interested in, then your passion for the subject will come through a lot stronger, and that's what they're really interested in seeing. Finally, Eve said, I came out of my interview thinking I'd completely failed, but I later found out that everyone else felt like that too. This is really common. Everybody comes out feeling like it's gone badly. Some people come out thinking it's the worst thing they've ever done. Some people come out feeling like it was amazing. Some people come out feeling like they were totally unmemorable. There is really no way to tell how you've done, so don't worry about stressing or overanalyzing it. Just do the best that you can and then try to leave it when you leave the room. So what do we not look at? We don't look at appearance, so we really don't care what you're wearing. You can be wearing a suit if that's what you feel comfortable in, and you can be wearing joggers. It really doesn't matter to us. We care about what you're saying, not what you're wearing. So definitely wear something you feel comfortable in. We're also not particularly interested in irrelevant extracurricular activities. With Oxbridge, we differentiate between extracurricular and supercurricular. Supercurricular means things you have done outside of your curriculum that directly relate to the subject you want to study. So you might have gone and read some extra books or done some extra research on something that really interested you. You've gone that extra step outside of the school curriculum. Extracurricular, on the other hand, is irrelevant sports or musical instruments, part-time work, anything that doesn't directly relate to your subject. If you've mentioned it in your personal statement, a tutor might open a conversation with it, but that will generally be to put you at ease. It won't have any bearing on the interview, essentially. We're not interested in your background. We're not worried about where you're from or who you know or anything like that. That's not something you need to worry about. We're also not interested in college choice at Oxbridge. So if you applied for Magdalen and you get pulled for an interview at Christchurch, Christchurch won't be offended that they weren't your college of choice. This is very normal, so not something you need to worry about. Finally, there are no trick questions or hidden agendas. People often think that Oxbridge interviews, or generally any university interview, is about tricking you. And you've really got to think about the fact actually it doesn't serve anybody. What interviewers want to see is genuine passion, interest. They want to have a good conversation with you. It wouldn't do them any favours to try and trick you. So that's not something you need to worry about either. So how can you prepare? Firstly, it's hard to prepare for an interview because you don't know what you'll be asked. So you don't need to stress too much. There's nothing you absolutely have to do before an interview. However, here are some things that might help. It's a good idea to relook at your schoolwork that you may have submitted and your personal statement. Generally, one way to think about this is the pieces of work that you're handing to the university and you're saying, this is what I know about. So if they ask you questions on things you've never studied before, you won't be expected to have prior knowledge. But if they ask you questions on things you've mentioned in your personal statement or that you've written about in your schoolwork, it's a good idea to have that fresh in your memory and to have a little bit extra to say about it. So, for example, if you're applying for history and you've written your schoolwork on Stalin's 5-year plans, it's a good idea to just refresh yourself, some of the arguments you made in that essay perhaps, some of the facts you've put in it. So just have a quick read of that. And with your personal statement, anything that you've mentioned, be prepared to have a conversation about. So they might ask you about something you thought about a book and they might push you on it a little bit. So it's a good idea to just revise those things a bit. It's also a good idea to keep reading around your subject even after you've put your personal statement in. Keep doing any relevant activities you are doing, and work experience, though not essential, is if you're doing it, then great, keep going. But yeah, the more you read around and the more you think about your subject, the easier it will be to talk about in an interview. It's also a good idea to keep an eye on your subject in the wider world. If you're applying for politics, maybe you want to have an eye on what's going on with Brexit or whatever area of politics you might be interested in, but something current. So this is Eleanor. She studies French and linguistics at Magdalen College, and this is her tips on how best to prepare for an interview. I would say that going over my personal statement and any books that I had mentioned was really valuable. I had a printed copy of my personal statement, which I had annotated, picking out specific points of interest. On each of these points, I had thought more deeply about them, so I was able to elaborate on them in the interview. This allowed me to feel as prepared as I could, which in turn massively helped de-stress me and settle my nerves. If you have mentioned a book or article or anything on your statement, it's really important that you've actually read it. So as I was saying, going over your personal statement is something that can just calm you down a bit, make sure you know what you're talking about. Definitely, if you've mentioned a book or an article, do read it, because if they ask you, they will be able to tell if you've just sort of read the Wikipedia definition of it. So have a couple of extra things to say about it. They want a conversation. That being said, don't prepare any speeches about things you've read. They want a conversation, and they will be able to tell if it's a sort of pre-prepared speech. But yeah, definitely going back over your personal statement, refreshing your memory on things you've talked about. So what types of questions might you be asked? You might be asked to think about current topics relating to your subject area, which is why we're saying it might be a good idea to keep an eye on sort of the wider world. You might be asked to build on existing knowledge from current or previous studies. As I was saying, with your personal statement or your written work, you might end up having a conversation. As I was saying, if you've submitted an essay about Stalin, you might be building on that and having a conversation about some of the things that your essay says and some of the wider arguments this might relate to. Problem solving, this would be particularly in maths and science subjects. You might be given a problem which you would be expected to solve in the interview. They might do this with you and help you out where you get stuck. You might be asked to analyse a prepared text. So this is when you would be given something before the interview. You'd have 20 or so minutes to read it, make some notes on it. And when you go into the interview, they'll ask you what you understood from it and to chat a little bit about what you think it might mean. Often you will not be expected to have any prior knowledge of this thing. And it's the same with if you're given a picture or a specimen or an object. For example, if you're applying for biology, maybe they'll give you a skull. And you're purposely not supposed to really know what it is, but they want to see how you might apply knowledge you already have to the thing in front of you. So maybe you can tell from where the holes are in the skull, where the eyes might be, and therefore what kind of animal it might be, etc. So what's really important with a lot of these questions is that you think aloud. It's not necessarily always about getting the right answer, but they want to see your thinking and they want to see how you're working through the problem, how you're applying knowledge you already have. I always think it's a little bit like maths questions when you're younger, where you can get points for working out. It's about showing how you're getting there, even if you don't get to the right place. You're also more than welcome to say that you don't know or ask for clarification. Like I said, it's a conversation, so they will help you out if you get a bit stuck. So MMI, these are the multiple mini interviews for medical courses at other universities. As I said, this is a little bit like speed dating, so there's lots of interview stations which you spend about 5 minutes at, and there'll be short practical tasks, sometimes based on ethical problems, others will be problem solving, others will be specific tasks, often resembling things you would have to do as a medical student, for instance. Some people really like this way of interviewing. One person said it's a little bit like having 10 chances at first impressions rather than just the one. So that's not something to worry about. So we're going to look at an example question now. This is a real question from a medicine interview. And I'm going to give you a bit of time to think about it. Put these countries in order by their crude mortality, deaths per 1,000 of the population: Bangladesh, Japan, South Africa, and the UK. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to have a think about this and make any notes that you can think of. So when you're approaching this question, lots of people will be thinking about what kind of things contribute to mortality. So for instance, lots of people will think crime and they'll think poverty, which might lead them to think about Bangladesh or South Africa. One thing to say is that it's really important to, even if you think what you're saying is obvious, to really spell out what you mean. So if you say, oh, poverty might affect mortality, you really need to sort of draw that out and explain what the relationship between poverty and mortality might be, and really show what your logic is there. But one thing lots of people don't think about with mortality is old age, and actually this would lead you towards the right answer, as actually Japan has an ageing population, and so they actually have the highest deaths per 1,000 of the population. So the answer in fact goes Japan, the UK, South Africa, and then Bangladesh, which very few people get right. So the tutors say that this question invites candidates to think about a public health question, an epidemiology that can be approached in many different ways without necessarily knowing anything about specific mortality rates around the world. It's important that, when you see this question, you're not expected to know off the top of your head what these mortality rates are. Instead, they want to see how you can apply sort of logic in your thinking to the question given. The majority of candidates will expect Bangladesh or South Africa to have the highest crude mortality rate, and we'll be surprised to find that it is in fact Japan. The other part of the mortality rate calculation is, of course, the age of the population. We wouldn't expect students to get the right answer right on their own, and in fact that's not the point. The point is to see how they apply their understanding of the social and cultural factors in health and illness to a problem of epidemiology. Even if you didn't get the right answer there, it'll be really important for them to see how you're thinking about it and to think of all of that out loud and to really think about pushing yourself and thinking, okay, so crime and poverty might be obvious answers to mortality, what else might there be? And if you apply that kind of thinking, it leads you closer to the correct answer. So this is an example law or politics question. This is quite different from the medicine question, but I'll also give you 30 seconds to have a think about it, write down any notes that you might have. Should it be illegal to run a red light in the middle of the night on an empty road? So this question won't have a right answer. This is about deciding a stance that you have and then probably being asked to justify it and to really think about what your stance means. So tutors say that studying law requires that students understand what the law is and also what it should be, that is, to think normatively. We are particularly interested in their capacity to justify their views and interpretations. This involves being able to analyse concepts and to critically appraise arguments and the reasoning behind a position, as well as to consider objections and to offer rebuttals to those objections. There isn't a right or wrong answer to this question. We would be using the example to see how well the candidate could justify their stance. We might explore things such as, is the only purpose or dominant purpose of the law to prevent harm? Can exceptions be made to laws? What is sufficient justification to break the law? And many more. So if you've been looking at this question and you've been thinking about it, you'd be expected to think about what the implications of your argument are, what other people might say in response to that, and how you would justify your position. And so you might expect a tutor to play devil's advocate and to push you quite a bit, but that's normal because they want to see that you can sort of consider what they're saying, take it on, or offer a rebuttal if it seems appropriate. This is Sarah, she studies chemistry, and this is her thoughts on how to stay calm and perform well in an interview. So she also agrees that it's very important to say your thought processes out loud. She says, I still do this in tutorials now. It's about how you approach a problem and apply your knowledge. You won't know the answer to everything, and that's absolutely okay. Often at this point, the tutors will give you a hint which may help you to solve the problem. It's okay if you don't know. Take a breath and you can ask the tutors to repeat a question. The tutors understand that interviewees can feel stressed in the interview, and they are keen to give you the opportunity to show them what you're capable of. There's no one path to a perfect interview. Just answer the question as it feels most natural to you. The tutors are human too. They aren't trying to trick you or put you off. They're just asking you some questions that will hopefully allow you to demonstrate how you think for yourself and apply your knowledge. So as you say, speaking your thought processes out loud is relevant for humanities and science subjects. They really want to see how you're thinking. And to remember that they really want a good conversation with you, so they're not trying to trick you, they're not trying to be mean, they're trying to encourage you and push you here and there to have a really good and interesting conversation. So, some do's and don'ts for your interview. Do take time before you answer each question. There's no rush, you can sit in silence for a while you think about it, they won't mind and they're used to it. Do ask for clarification if you need it. You can say, I don't know, you can ask them to repeat, or you can ask them to clarify a word if you don't understand it. Listen carefully to the tutor's responses. They might be giving you new information that might change the way you think about what you're talking about. So listen carefully when they're talking to you. Get used to thinking out loud. And remember that tutors and academics are human too. They all go home to dogs, cats, children, husbands, wives, normal lives. Don't be intimidated by them. Don't panic. It's easier said than done, but I think it's a really good tip generally to spend the half hour before your interview doing something that really calms you down, makes you feel like yourself. Call a friend, have a coffee, go for a walk, whatever it might be, but really try not to panic because it won't help you in the interview. Don't be tempted to launch into prepared speeches. How you think is what is important here. So it's not about the things you've prepared saying or all the things you've memorised. And tutors really will notice if it's a sort of pre-prepared speech and that's really not what they're interested in. Don't worry if you are cut off at any point or make mistakes. That's fine, that's normal. Sometimes you'll babble and they'll want to cut across you. That's not something to worry about. And if you make a mistake, that's completely fine. That's normal. Students do that, academics do it. It's about taking you step by step, and they might have to help you out. They might take you down a different direction. You might have the wrong end of the stick. All of that is completely fine. So don't worry about mistakes or being cut off. Don't be tempted to judge your performance. As Eve pointed out earlier in the presentation, lots of people come out thinking they've done terribly. It doesn't mean you have. So when you leave that interview, just be proud of yourself. You did it. Leave it there and wait to hear back. There will be staff and students available during the interview process who are there to support you. So just remember, the entire interview process, people really do want to help. And if you need anything, just get in touch with the people you can find and you will be okay. So good luck. If you have any questions, then please contact us at outreach@mags.ox.ac.uk. You can ask our current students questions, or if you go on Magdalen College's website, there's a chat to students function. You can see what subjects they study and you can drop them a message and they'll get back to you. You can ask them anything about studying, student life, interviews, admissions, whatever it is. And if you're wondering about the super curricular stuff I was talking about earlier and you think, oh, I'm not really sure where to go, how to find that kind of thing, do have a look at our super curricular resource pack. The link is here. It also can be found on our website. This is split into subjects and you can find your subjects and find loads of great resources, things you can do that will look really good on your personal statement and provide you things to talk about in an interview. So, best of luck. Thank you very much.